Hey there. If you're a frequent listener to our show, you already know that our show is brought to you by our friends over at Artillery Sports. But what you may not know is that Artillery Sports helps athletes of all types win on and off the course and court. They do this by selling quality, durable, and precision manufactured sports equipment that keeps you in the game, while also using a portion of the profits to provide the funding needed to care for our nation's veterans. With Artillery Sports, it's more than just a game. So head over to artillerysports.com today to buy the quality equipment you need to keep you in the game and to help our nation's veterans at the same time. That's artillerysports.com. Make sure you head on over there today. Oh, and use the code DOCFIRST to get 10% off your first order. Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at documentary filmmaking. I'm your host and a documentary filmmaker myself, Christian Taylor, and today I'm recording this podcast on February 2025. Now, if you're listening to this, you'll know that this is the second part of a two-part episode. So we are recording on the same day that we recorded the other one. If you're a regular listener, you'll also know that this is a new feature of our podcast. I've started sharing the date that we are recording because I want everybody to know this is a new world we're living in since January 2025. And I want to give context for our discussion today. We are going to talk about the lady that we're talking about today in this film. It does talk about politics, and there's going to be a question that I will ask about what she would think if she was here today. So I want you to understand the context of the time that we're living in today and the answers that these questions will be given in. So that's where we are, and today, the ladies that I am joined with are the co-producers and co-directors of this film. This film is an amazing film. I loved watching it. It's called Shaking Up: The Life and Times of Liz Carpenter. And if you didn't listen to the first episode of this, please go back and listen to it. It was just a wonderful episode. These ladies did give a lot of their history, their background. We really laid the foundation for the discussion of this film. So it's really important that you listen to the first one. This film is coming out on March 1st. And so we're really excited to promote this film. And today we are joined by Liz Carpenter's daughter, Christy, and also Abby, who I learned they were basically housemates in London in 1969, which is an important little date. And so she knew Liz as well. Anyway, so I'd like to welcome you ladies. Thank you so much for coming back. It's really nice that you would stay with me today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so we're just going to tell a little bit, Christy, a little bit about who you are, a little bit about, why you made this film.
Okay, well, I have a kind of a long career at this point. And ended up being a filmmaker. Wasn't an expected ending, but I'm a lawyer by training. Spent some time in the federal government in Washington. Was very interested in a career in public policy, but shifted gears when new media technologies opened up the way for interactivity. I mean, there was no World Wide Web then. So I was really an early pioneer working for some major media companies in that arena. And then did a lot of work in communications in another manner, public relations for a variety of clients and trade associations and so forth, and ended up at the Paley Center for Media in New York, which oversaw it and its operation in Los Angeles, holding forums on all aspects of media, from the business dynamics to the creative process to journalism and so forth. So I married together my Washington upbringing with my longtime interest in media, child of two journalists, so here I am.
Yep. And you made a movie about your mom to educate us about her amazing life, together with Abby Ginzberg. Abby, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, and then you can take us into the log line about this film and what it's all about.
So I'm a full-time documentary producer, and I've been working as a documentary filmmaker for the last 35 plus years. and have made a number of films that have, played at film festivals around the world and been broadcast on public television. And I have one about my former Congresswoman Barbara Lee that is now on Amazon Prime, and anybody who wants to see it can watch it. It's called Barbara Lee Speaking Truth to Power. And she's now running for mayor of Oakland, which is like, talk about you never quite know where your film is going to become relevant or why. It's like, okay, well, people who don't know enough about her need to watch it so they can figure out whether or not they want to vote for her for mayor of Oakland. What I would say is kind of an overview of the films that I do is I'm interested in people who inspire me, but who I feel like are not that well known in the larger society. So, I tend to do stories about sort of people that are below the radar, but whose lives intersect people who you definitely know about. So I made a film about a South African whose life totally intersected with Nelson Mandela. I've made films about people whose lives have intersected with Martin Luther King, and we get to Liz Carpenter and her lives totally intersected with the Johnsons. Both Lady Bird and Lyndon Johnson. So there's something about identifying the people who are a little bit behind the scenes and trying to shine a spotlight on their achievements and what makes them inspirational that has always motivated me. So that kind of gets us to where we are today.
Yeah, well, I really resonate with that because that's kind of what I love to do in my filmmaking, my storytelling as well. Really shine light on the voices that really don't get the spotlight. So thank you for doing that. Thank you, ladies, for being on this podcast. And like I said, we really dove into this story a little bit. This story is about an amazing woman who was a trailblazer in Washington D.C. She really, she really was not. She was like the first woman that started, jumping into being this journalism powerhouse in DC back in the early 40s, right? Why don't you tell us a little bit about who she is before we jump into learning more about, what's going to happen with this film?
Yeah, well, my mother was born in Texas in 1920, 5 days after the adoption of the 19th Amendment, something I consider no coincidence. But she got a journalism. She just always had this desire to be in the center of things, in the room where it happens. Plus, she was keenly interested in journalism. So as soon as she graduated, she hopped on a train and went straight to Washington, D.C., age 22. And so she did break new ground in Washington. There were other women journalists, but they were few and far between. Most newspapers, and newspapers were the name of the game in that era in journalism, did not hire women. Or if they hired women, it was for the society pages, or what was the women's pages, as they were called in that day. And so she just, that was never going to be something she wanted to do. So she managed to pound the quarters of the National Press Building with her clippings and a scrapbook under her arm and get a job and get a press pass. And began covering Eleanor Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt press conferences from the get-go. But she, in terms of making breakthroughs for other women, that really got underway in a more meaningful capacity when she became president of the Women's National Press Club in 1954. And then she worked on gaining women rights to cover things that they otherwise couldn't cover, such as the newsmaker luncheons that the National Press Club, the all-male National Press Club, would hold. And so she made breakthroughs there, and she really supported other women and boosted other women journalists the entire way through her life. So,
and one of the things that I found fascinating is that she put pressure on, I think it was Nixon,
Nikita
maybe.
Khrushchev?
Yes.
Okay.
She used Nikita Khrushchev to pressure, I think, Nixon, right? To have women. Who was it?
No. It was Eisenhower was president. She was dealing because women couldn't attend these National Press Club luncheons. She got the first breakthrough, which is getting the right for women reporters to sit in a balcony above the ballroom where they couldn't ask questions. They could just sit in the balcony and observe. That was the first breakthrough.
Okay.
And so what the goal was, of course, to get women treated equally and to be on the floor asking questions and to become members of the club, ultimately. So she would lobby with various newsmakers who were coming to speak to say, no, we won't speak unless women are allowed to be on the floor and ask questions too. And so one of the people she lobbied, and not directly, through the Soviet embassy, it was the Soviet Union in those days, to have Nikita Khrushchev refuse to speak while on his visit to Washington, unless women were allowed.
It's
And
amazing.
so the press club wanted Nikita Khrushchev. My God, it's the middle of the Cold War, so that breakthrough was made, and women were
Amazing.
allowed for the first time. So that's just a great example that we like telling in the film.
Yeah. So keep going. So anyway, that was just the first. And then what happened?
In terms of her journalism, or more broadly?
More broadly, you got us
Okay,
into the
great.
story.
Okay.
You got us into the story of the film. So
Yeah.
we were gonna, talk about, sort of the distribution and what's happening, but we're gonna save that
Yeah.
because we're already in the story of the film, and I think the
Okay.
story of the film to me is just fascinating. So I want to learn a
Yeah.
little bit more about your mom and about the story because I want to talk about, we want to talk about how you balance the portrait of your mom with the politics. Okay. And so you really masterfully told this story. You broke it up into several chapters. It was very clear. The storytelling was very clear. And you did include the portrait of who she was as a person, but you also made it very clear of what her politics were and what she wanted to get out. So your point of view was very clear as well.
Yeah.
So we're in the
Well, let me just
storytelling now.
let
Go
me
ahead.
just add, and I'll let Abby talk a little more about the balance. But the story is told in three chapters. First is the journalism chapter. Second is her time in the White House, the LBJ White House, and she had covered LBJ as a congressman, senator, majority leader, and so forth. Worked for him as vice president before she went to the White House, and became chief of staff to Lady Bird. And then the last chapter is all about her leadership in the women's movement. So that's a capsulized overview of the film, and I'll let Abby talk about telling the balance. But I'll just say, from the daughter perspective, there was no separating Liz from her politics. So you kind of tell one piece, you're telling all of that. So Abby, I'll let you
Well,
tell
let
from
me
a
just
filmmaker point of view.
Abby, give me 1 second before we bring you back in. The one thing I'm going to say is from the daughter perspective, the thing that made this an amazing film and I think took it to another level was the access that you had. The access to a lot of the people in here, whether it was the family members of LBJ or whether it was the reporters that you were able to speak to, whether it was the members of just different people who were high level Washington figures during that time. You were able to get them to sit down and have interviews with them. And so I thought that really took your movie to the next level. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with your mom and with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I knew who my mother knew. I don't mean, in every case I knew them super well personally, but I mean, I knew people who are still living, because there were a lot of people who have been great to have on camera who are no longer with us. But I knew legendary journalists such as Dan Rather and Bill Moyers, who had been press secretary to Lyndon Johnson, in addition to going on and having a career as a publisher and so forth. So yeah, so I knew they knew my mother both quite well, especially Moyers, who she works side by side with in the White House. Linda Lucy Johnson, Linda Johnson, Rob, the two daughters of the Johnsons, are people that I'd known since I was a tiny tot. And so I was able to get them to agree to talk. My mother was good friends with a congresswoman, an African American congresswoman named Eddie Bernice Johnson. I was able to get her to come on board. Douglas Brinkley, presidential historian,
Yeah.
he knew my mother, not real well, but I knew him, and he
Yeah.
had written a book about. He's writing a trilogy, has written a trilogy of histories of presidents and the environment, and so he
Mm,
has a lot to say about the Johnson White House and Lady
yeah.
Bird, and her impact on the environment, and so. he was willing to talk. And then there were Eleanor Smeal, who was a really an early leader in the women's movement, is still around. Knew my mother, met my mother when Ellie was very young, and Mary Beth Rogers, who was chief of staff to Ann Richards and an expert on Texas politics. Just I could go on and on, but these are some of the people that we were able to get to illuminate Liz's story.
I really thought that took it to next level. One thing that I was curious about is the Johnson girls talked about how you really had to do what Liz said, and that it was like if she was your own mother, and you couldn't differentiate. There was no way to really say no, and I wasn't sure if that was good or if she was happy about that, or if she wasn't happy about that. So what, or how they felt about your mom. Was there a good relationship there? Was it a tense relationship?
Yeah, there was a good, loving, lifelong relationship that, there. I mean, lifelong for their lives. But yeah, I mean, Liz could be very
bossy.
She was she could be, very pushy, and she knew what she wanted to get done, and she would just make it happen. And as Linda said, shyness was not a word in her lexicon. I mean, and Linda was kind of shy. So during those White House years, they were both teenagers. So, my mother was pushing them in front of cameras and stuff all the time, and that wasn't always what a teenager wanted to be doing. So, anyway,
but it sounded like too she was able to balance that pushiness, but people still loved her, and maybe that had to do with her sense of humor.
I mean, she was this personality that was very effusively warm and funny and lovable, and so she was hard to dislike.
Yeah,
and so she got away with a lot.
That's exactly right.
So Abby,
I would just say, as an outsider listening to those interviews and listening to kind of their expressions as they were talking about Liz, I mean, she was somebody that they had to sort of obey. You know what I mean? And as much as they might not have wanted to, there was not a lot of room to say no to Liz, because she was managing a lot of the choreography that was going on at that time in the White House. And the girls were part of that. So, as adults, they can look back and say, saying no to Liz was not going to be happening.
All right. So talk to me about how you balance the portrait of her and the politics.
Well, I wanted to say something because it just occurred to me as we were talking about the Khrushchev thing. So one thing that I think the story about Liz forcing the male-only National Press Club to finally admit women, that was sort of a lifelong goal of hers, and she finally achieved it, later on. It shows that she was always sort of a feminist. You know what I mean? It shows that she was always a feminist, and she was always fighting for women's rights. I mean, so you see in the encapsulated story of Khrushchev and telling him he shouldn't speak here unless women are allowed to participate, you see everything else that's sort of going to unfold in the late 70s and early 80s, about the fight that she's going to fight, because she was on this fight from the very beginning. So it's obvious as you watch the film, but I just wanted to say it was, worth underscoring here.
Well, and you know what I think is interesting too? This doesn't get any mention, but my husband has been very supportive of me, and I would have never been able to do the movies I did or do anything that I've done. My father was as well. I mean, I was working in Washington in news when I was 14. Without those men to support me, I couldn't have done what I did. So clearly, Christy, your father had to have been supportive of your mother and really allowed her to do everything she did not hold her back, and encouraged her from the moment he met her. So I would like to give him a little props here, because, he certainly did not rein her in. And that was not true for men of that time.
No. Can I elaborate a little bit? Yeah. I mean, so they met in high school. She was the editor of the high school paper. He was the business manager. They went on to University of Texas together to study journalism. And so they shared this ambition to go right to Washington, D.C. to begin practicing their craft. Yeah, no, he was a very unusual for his time. It was a marriage of complete equals. And the fact that she was this flamboyant, attention-grabbing personality was like okay with him.
Yeah, he wasn't threatened, it seemed.
No, he wasn't threatened. I mean, he was his own person. He was a strong person in his own way, absolutely. So he was supportive of her. They were working together 24/7. I mean, so if their lives were totally melded. He died at a way too early age, at age 52. But yeah, kudos to him for being who he was, because it would have made life very difficult for her.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know that he could have forced her to not do what she was doing.
No, I just don't think.
He didn't have to work with her.
Right. I don't think the marriage would have lasted, probably, if she would have done what she was going to do anyway, just from, that's what I learned from the film. But Abby, let's go back to you and talk to me again about balancing things. Tell me how you built the story.
Oh dear. I mean, okay, so one challenge when you're doing, quote, a portrait is you can't do a resume. So there were things, Liz, for example, traveled a lot with LBJ when he was vice president. That didn't make it in. International travel, places nobody was going to in the early 60s, et cetera. So really her role in the Johnson White House was much bigger than we get to show it to be. But that was a choice we had to make, because it's like,
yeah, I knew you had to cut some stuff out. There was no way with that kind of, from the 1942 to, when did she pass? We didn't learn.
2010.
Oh my goodness, she lived to 2010? Oh,
yeah, she was 89.
So I think you only covered till the late 70s, right?
Yeah, well, no, into the 80s. But no, we couldn't do that. And she was active up until 5 years before her death, I would say, mainly giving speeches and writing books and writing articles of all kinds.
So you couldn't cover everything. You had to cut out a lot.
No, absolutely had to cut out a lot. And and she was also director of communication. She was some assistant secretary in the department.
Well, she was when Jimmy Carter formed the Department of Education, which is now, on the chopping block. Liz was appointed by Jimmy Carter as Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs. So she actually went back to Washington for a couple of years before coming back to Texas. So, we couldn't even touch on that.
Yeah. Well, let's go back, Abby. You were talking about, the portrait. Keep going.
Okay, so it's very important, again, for people who make documentaries to know the difference between a portrait and sort of how that means you cannot deal with someone's entire resume. You have to start knowing that. So then you were going to say to yourself, well, what are the themes? And so what I was saying earlier about Liz being a feminist from day one, that needs to kind of come through in every one of the acts that we're showing. And it does. I mean, we show that. And you're looking for kind of, that's a word I use, it would be grace notes about things that just reinforce the portrait that you're sort of painting a portrait of her. So one of the things about Liz, that we wanted as much as we could get of was her humor. And we did as well as we could. It's like the reason that line about what's the most important thing you tell people, well, make sure, what is it, before milking time? Answer all your
calls. Turn all your phone calls before milking time.
Well, what time is milking time, by the way?
It doesn't matter. The point is, that's an insane thing to say, and she said it. It's like, it's just funny. So we went for what we had of little, clips of her being humorous. Because
I loved the clips when she was on TV, and she was beautiful. She was elegant in her own way. She wasn't this, darling, she wasn't Jackie O, but she still had kind of that air about her anyway.
Yes. And so anyway, we were looking for, things that would, as I say, sort of build the portrait. And I think, and Christy knew from the beginning, and I agreed with her, that we had to put in something about her Salado upbringing and her early ancestors and that whole piece.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So one of the challenges for us, and again, I can't even remember, what the debate was, but figuring out where that comes. Because you have to know enough about Liz to care about where she came from. And it can't come too late, because by then it's irrelevant. And so finding the place to put in someone's early history is always a challenge. And
Yeah,
I mean, again, I don't remember the process anymore, but I think we nailed it in
I
terms of
do.
where that needed to come. You find
Yep.
out about Liz and her female ancestors at just the right moment. So
Yep.
part of what Christy had in mind here is that, Liz didn't kind of just hop out of the egg by herself. She came from a long line of strong women. And it
Yep.
was really, and that had a big influence on Texas. And it was, I mean, I didn't know anything about these people. So it was like,
Yeah, no,
okay,
no. And
we got to tell that story.
yeah, I mean, her feminism was baked into her. It was in her DNA. I mean,
Yeah.
she two of her great aunts were suffragists, and not just run of the mill suffragists, like leader suffragists, and the men in her family were absolutely historically important early people in Texas in the 1830s. We could barely touch on that, but she
That's
was reared on all those stories, and so
clearly.
she knew that a lot was expected of her coming from this upbringing, and she knew as a woman she could follow in the footsteps and do things, even though it was an era and it was very hard for women to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. Well, you guys did a wonderful job doing that. The storytelling I thought was really brilliant, and how you used the archival, the interviews, the music, her clips. You weaved those together to tell the story. I thought it was beautiful. That Salado part, she mentioned, I think, or somebody mentioned her being from Salado, but it wasn't that long later that you went into that Salado part. So you kind of prepped us for it, and then you took us into it. So it was great. So thank you for that. Now, we have about 5 minutes left, which isn't enough time to get into this, but I do at least want to touch on it. I want to talk about, where this is going to air on March 1st and how that all happened. So do that as quickly as you can.
Yeah, I'll do that. I've spent a lot of time with involvement in public television. I was appointed by Clinton to the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I served on the boards of two stations. So it's a Byzantine structure, public broadcasting. So we were able to come into it, and Abby has had her own experiences getting some of her films on public TV. So we came to it with knowledge. I think it's hard for beginning filmmakers to know how to do that. And so what we ended up, we knew from the beginning this was a perfect fit with public television. Public television is all about providing and doing things that are educational, inspiring, and entertaining. And that's what our film is. And so we went. One of the first things we did, I went to Austin PBS, where I'd served on the board, to Sarah Robertson, the head of all content for the station, and showed her our sizzle reel, and she was on board to be for the station, to be the presenting station, is the terminology that's used, to the wider system. And we decided to go with an independent distributor it's a nonprofit that only distributes to public television stations, and called APT, the very generic name of American Public Television. And they have been in the process of distributing our film. They got very excited about it, and distributing our film to public television stations around the country for Women's History Month. We've gotten excellent pickup so far. It's going to be on different days in different cities on our website soon. Sometime next week, we will have a list of all the cities and the times when it will be aired. Listeners and viewers should also know that it will be streamable on pbs.org. Which is for free for the first 2 months, and then on PBS Passport. So there are lots of ways that people are going to be able to see the film, and we are very happy with the support we've gotten from public television.
Yeah, and if you don't know, if you don't know about PBS, so sorry, Abby, go ahead.
I just wanted to give the shout out for the first airings are going to be on March 3rd, New York City, which is a big deal for us, WNET, at 10 p.m., and KQED, my home station in the San Francisco Bay Area, at 9 p.m. So March 3rd for at least New York and San Francisco Bay Area is, it's the premiere. So if you happen to live in one of those places, watch it.
Yeah, and I'll just say all of Texas, every one of the 11 stations is carrying the film on March 18th at 8 p.m. So
Oh, wonderful.
For the Texas folks, that's the time you can see it on your station.
Wonderful. And so, if you don't know what PBS Passport is, go to your PBS station. If you are donating to your PBS station, you can also then get a passport to watch things online and for then free, of course. But you're making a donation to
Yeah.
PBS.
Yeah, I mean, for free though for the first 2 months on PBS.org, and then on PBS Passport.
Right. So, ladies, it has been a wonderful, wonderful thing having you here on our podcast. I've learned so much from you. I loved watching your film. I'm going to continue talking to others about it. I hope you'll come back when you have your next film. And I really wish you all the best with this. It was a delight to get to know your mother. I'm so thankful for what she's done for all of us women journalists. And, I hope you will enjoy this journey that you're about to go on. It's going to be great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, everybody. We're not going to do Docuview Déjà Vu today. We got to get out of here. So listen to our last one if you're interested. We actually, Abby, do you have a film? Let's do this real quick. Do you have a film real quick that you want people to watch?
I do. I have a film that I produced and somebody else, a woman named Catherine Massoud, directed. It's called A Double Life.
Oh, hang on. Don't tell anybody. All right, everybody. We are going to do Docuview Déjà Vu. We have to do special music. Anyway, go on.
Okay, so the film that I want to just promote, because we just got it up on streaming and I think people will really enjoy it. It's a really interesting documentary about sort of the prisoner rights movement of the late 60s, early 70s. And it's a story of a lawyer who ended up going underground for 13 years after he was accused of bringing a gun into San Quentin. And it's the story of his journey and his coming back and standing trial and everything that happens all around this case. His name is Steve Bingham. The film is called A Double Life, and it is now streaming on Amazon, Google Play, and YouTube Movies. And all you have to do is remember the name, A Double Life, the documentary, and that's it.
And we will put it in our show notes, everybody. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everybody has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. Bye, everybody.
Bye.